Today we're talking about how to use timecode within EOS Nomad, so let's get started. In this demo, we're going to show you how to connect ETC Eos Nomad up with Reaper for timecode programming purposes. We use three applications. Obviously, we've got Nomad, we have Reaper, and then this third software I'll bring up here for you called loopMIDI, which you can download. And it's a free download. There's the information for it. Tobias makes this great tool for it. Works on Windows. There's a native way to do it in Mac as well, but for PC, you'll need this tool here. And on the setup, by default, I think it sets this one up by default. Otherwise, you can add it. But it's just a loopMIDI port. We could add a different port with a different name. I can call this EOS and click add, and that creates another instance right there. So we'll use that for this demo. And I'll just close that. It's running in the background. So within EOS, I'm going to press F9 on Nomad. We'll go under device settings. Under device, we'll go under show control. Under show control, you'll see local MIDI, RX, and TX. We want the RX, so that's us receiving that information. Here we can see the different instances of, these are the different interfaces it can see, and here's our EOS one. We want to make sure RX, which is receive, is enabled. And the timecode source ID there is 1. And just to prevent any weirdness from going on, I'm going to go ahead and disable all of these other instances so that we're only receiving and transmitting on that EOS instance, which is part of loopMIDI. You can see it down there as well. And so that takes care of it here. We'll hop up to System. Under System, we go to Show Control. Under Show Control, under System, we go to MIDI. And under here, we'll just see that we have MIDI Timecode. RX is enabled. That's that checkbox there. And for what we're doing here, that's all we really need. We'll now go into Reaper. Here under Reaper, this is a brand new empty project. I'm going to go Insert Media File. We're going to grab this audio file here from Soundstripe. And I'll move it to the very beginning of the timeline here. Then under Options, Preferences, we'll see different interfaces. I have the loopMIDI there enabled. I'll check that to unselect it. And in here, you'll see EOS, so I'll click on Enable there by clicking on that. So you see there's the dot there. Otherwise, you could double click on it, and it brings up a different window here, and this is how we can enable or disable. Now, we need none of these other boxes checked, so we just enable it and click OK. Then I'm going to insert, and then you'll see SMPTE LTC MTC timecode generator. So that generates that, and I'll drag that under new track down here. I'll make it the same length as the audio file, if not just slightly longer. I'll right-click on it, source properties, and by default, it's going to send out LTC, which is SMPTE timecode, and I've heard it referred to as like screeching pigs when you listen to it. So we want that to send out via MIDI timecode, so there it is. Our frame rate is 30 frames per second, and our start is going to be at 0, and I'll talk about that here in a minute, and I'll click OK. One last thing we have to set up is click here on Root. Under Root, we sit here, and we're going to see MIDI hardware output, and so here we're going to choose that EOS. And if you don't see it drop down here, go back to Preferences, make sure it's checked in there. And what I'll do here is once I hit play, so it's playing the audio file and it's generating the timecode. Now when I come back into ETC here, I'm going to go to tab 11, which is show control, which you can hit by hitting tab 11, or through here you can find show control. And I'm going to, as you see, this is empty, so I'm going to put event 1, and then it's going to come in. I'm going to label this. So we'll label event list 1 as timecode. The type here, I can click on that, and down here I'm going to choose MIDI timecode and press enter. The source number is 1. This is that source number we set up in settings. Internal, I want off. External, which is what we're going to source, is on. And then this is just the time that it's listening to. So in this case, it's going to listen to all times that come in. And then that frame per second is that same thing that we defined within Reaper. So what I'll do now is I'll take Reaper, we'll minimize this a little bit, and you'll see as we press play, And so there's our timecode working just fine. Okay, great. Just to show you too, internal, if you have internal and it triggers, it's just going to free flow. Kind of a neat thing if you have external and internal in is that if I play this and then I pause and it stops receiving timecode, it's just going to keep flowing forward. In a live environment, not during programming, but during a show environment, I'll often do that because in a real environment, you can drop a beat of timecode or a frame of timecode, and as a result, it may not actually fire the cue. So because of that, I'll have this running in the background on internal, and that's kind of my fail-safe if we drop a couple of frames of timecode. But in a programming environment, I leave that external on only. Okay, now let's get into some of the macros that I've got set up for that. I've got a magic sheet here that I'll show you real quick. And then I'll show you the macros. I'll expose the macros behind it. So this is a little grid. This will enable external time or disable external time, which is the same as clicking on that on and off, toggling that. This turns on learning mode, which we'll talk here in a moment. And then over here, we can toggle external time. So here is discretely on, discretely off. You see it disappear, on, off, and this toggles it on and off. And with it on, I can turn on learning, and I can click it again, which turns off learning. So those are controls for that, and I've got a list of up to 5 event lists. I typically stick pretty much exclusively to event list 1 or 2. The second thing is I've got these learn macros, which are kind of neat. This is what I'll do, and I'll show you in a moment how we walk through programming a song to timecode. And then over here, we've got some offsets of times. So in our environment, if I need to nudge the timecode that we've recorded by 100 milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, or 1 second, or 3 seconds, I've got these quick buttons because timecode records in hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And since most of us, we don't think of time as a frame or sub 30 seconds, we tend to think of it as in half of a second or a tenth of a second. I've got these macros here to make those adjustments for me. So let's look behind the scenes, see what those macros are and how they're programmed. So we'll start with the offsets there. So what's really nice with 30 frames a second, 100 milliseconds is exactly 3 frames. So the macro control is execute timecode plus 3 frames. And then obviously minus is plus minus 0.3. 15 frames is half a second, and obviously 100 is 1 second. 3 seconds is 300, and that's just in ETC's way of entering timecode. I have a timecode of 0, which zeroes it out or clears it out. I have this thing called room delay. So depending on the venue in, how you're programming it, and where you want beats to synchronize to, when I'm doing offline programming, I've got speakers that are within 2 or 3 feet of me, and so there's virtually no sound delay between when the sound comes out of the speaker and the cues fire. But in a production environment, the reality is that I'm hundreds of feet or maybe dozens of feet away from the speakers. And where I normally do a lot of my programming, we're about 65 milliseconds away, which comes pretty darn close to 2 frames. So this is in here so that I can program, and when I get everything synchronized and I've programmed it in an offline environment or using my near field monitors, I can add this room delay, and that just adds 2 seconds to all of the time codes. Or let's just say now I need to go from what was programmed live to in my office. That will take away those 2 frames of delay. I do all my programming in cue list 2. And so that's where these come in. And these are just the terms I typically ascribe to cues, pretty generically, but probably 80% of my cues have a label like this, which is going to be labeling things as intro, verse, chorus, bridge, instrumental, build, breakdown, tag, or ending. And so, oops. So that's what I've got for those macros. I'll show you how I use those. And then here are all those triggers that I've showed you. So here's clear command event 1/ external enable and disable. And these are the ones for all 5 events. Down here, this is my learn events. And so this, when it goes to learn, will also fire the appropriate enable. So if timecode and that event external wasn't already enabled, it will force enable it and then enter the learn events. And then down here, we have another clear timecode event. And then down here, I have, we'll walk through these. These are the toggles. So these toggle event external on and off. So in ETC Macroland, external is a toggle, but you can, as you see up here, discreetly say, I want it enabled or disabled. And if you omit that, then it will toggle. And then to show you how I do this in a show for programming, let me do this. We'll actually just break up the screen here just really quickly. And what really matters to me here are these. And then on this side, I'll throw up a cue list. And I'll put myself into Q2 slash, let's see, we need to create cue list 2. So I'll go Q2/1. This is the way I typically do it. I will build a block of cues. For me, I like offsetting all my cues by 5. So I'm going to go 5 through 100 with an offset of 5. So I space all my cues out by 5. That's purely my own convention here. Not right, not wrong. It's just the way I manage things. Here, I'm going to put Q2/1 and Control-Shift-L to load it, which now puts that up. And so I'll be in Q1 right now. And then I'll also modify this because we want to see timecode. So in our PSD, there's timecode, and I'll just bring that all the way to the top. And I'll also bring label up there as well. So there you see timecode and label and our cues. The way I run my shows is my master shows, everything's loaded into cue list 1. I'll use cue list 2 is where I write a new song, and then I'll load that song into cue list 1 if we're using it for that specific show. What we have is I've got a partial magic sheet loaded up here. What I do in real life is I've got a Stream Deck loaded, and these buttons are all on a Stream Deck. So I've got a physical tactile button that I can use to control these. And on that Stream Deck, I'll also control Reaper. But for the purposes of this, we'll just do it this way. So I've got Reaper here. And before I start everything, I'll make sure that we've got event list 1 is loaded and listening. And I'm going to toggle it so that it is in learning mode. And then as I play the song, you'll see all I'm going to do is click these, and I might hit the L label button to change the label if I find it more appropriate for that section, something more descriptive. But here we go, watch. So intro. And actually that was the verse, so I'll just hit label, verse. So instrumental, chorus. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll add a note here of like, breakdown, all in, something like that. Okay, and we'll just stop there. That's enough for what we're doing here. And as you see, the time code is blank. And so what I need to load on there really quickly is I need to let this cue list know where it's grabbing time from. So what I'll do is while the PSD here is selected, I'm going to do Q2/, which says cue list 2. Down here, my soft keys, more soft key, time code, and then time code, I'll just put in the time code event list number, which is 1. And when I press that, you see this all populates in here right here and now. One change I'm going to make here really quick is that, I probably miscalled this song. So I'm going to delete Q30 altogether. And I'll show you a couple things that affects. So we'll delete that, and then on verse, because we took that a little late, I'm going to say I'm going to take on time using these macros. I'm going to take 1 second off of that so it fires just a little sooner. And so let's show you how this works as far as playing it back. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn learning off. So I'll toggle that off. And now when I go back to the top of the song, you'll see the cues automatically fire as we go through the song. And since I've got a little bit of a delay, I can sit there and say, I need to back this up 2 seconds. So I'll take 2 seconds off that time. So again, might back that up a little bit. I like that timing. All right, so that shows you how I program cues using Reaper, how it's wired into EOS using loopMIDI. We've set up a custom interface here. loopMIDI automatically loads every time you start up the computer, which is nice. And you can see how we do it here in Reaper. The only thing that I'll say that I do differently than what I've shown here explicitly is on these source properties. So what I'll typically do is for each song, I'll start it at a different hour number. So instead of it starting at 0, it starts at 1. So now when you look at the time code up here in the upper left and I play, the time starts at 1. And so what I do is each song that I've got, if I'm doing a dance routine or a musical or house of worship, is that each song in the set of the live performance is going to start at the hour relative to the song. And so what I do is I keep a library of all the songs that we have going on for that set. And the time code hour doesn't really matter when I shove them in the archive. That's just the hour they were at previously. But then when I pull them into the show, I'll reset the time code numbers for that song to be at the correct hour 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Most of the shows that I'm doing that are time coded, we're not actually using Reaper in our live performance. Usually we're using something like Pro Tools or Ableton, and that's all controlled by the band. I'm just going to say most of the time it's Ableton. And so the music director or band director or whoever that is that's in charge of that tech is handling that, and they're sending us empty time code. I'm using Reaper almost exclusively for programming purposes only and setting the layout of the song and then programming the cues from there. And so when we switch over I'll post a couple other videos on how I connect with Ableton. In some other environments where we're Mac-centric, as I do at my normal weekend gig, I'm using a tool called QPoints, and that's running on the Mac. It's the same Mac that runs Ableton, and that's simply just for a simplicity of routing the audio, and it's got slightly better OSC control, so I can remotely control the playback of the music relative to Reaper or anything else. It's a pretty simple tool, so I'll post other videos on how to do that. But here's a quick, in a nutshell, how to do timecode and how I start programming a timecode with ETC Eos Nomad and Reaper.